Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns. This week is part 3 of our Christopher Nolan trilogy. We're looking at his entire career, and this week we have another guest. So joining me, Alan, and Sol over there. Say hello, Sol.
Hello.
Joining us this week is Gareth.
Hello.
Gareth, who has been with us a few times before, and you've been drafted in here for the third instalment. So before we get into this week's films, which are Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar and Dunkirk, the last 3 films as of date of Christopher Nolan, do you want to give us a quick rundown on how are your feelings, Christopher Nolan generally, previous films, which ones you've seen?
Well, no, I am a fan of Christopher Nolan. Well, okay, so I think this is something that me and Sol are going to argue about over the next however long we're talking. I'm not a massive fan of superhero films as a genre, and although I totally acknowledge that the Nolan Batman films are very different in tone to other superhero films, I still have a bit of a blind spot with them, and I can't get past the fact that it's just someone in a silly outfit doing a silly voice.
Well, we might share more.
Well, I know that you guys have already covered some earlier Christopher Nolan films, and I haven't heard those conversations yet as we're recording, so I'm not sure how you feel about the earlier Batman films, but I know we're going to talk about the Dark Knight Rises today.
I mean, is it worth us doing a quick recap? If anyone has jumped straight ahead to the third part of what we're doing here, or indeed just wants a little recap of the last 2 weeks, I would say that Alan and I are both, on the whole, pretty positive when it comes to Christopher Nolan. I think we both admire the technical mastery that goes into, I suppose, his writing more than anything. And obviously that is
impeccable.
Yeah, and that is backed up from a filmmaking point of view.
I think what we really were getting at last week is a holistic approach to filmmaking. So everything ties in, the way he chooses to shoot something adds to the story. The little bits and pieces he'll drop in earlier on, which will pay off later. Yes. Like he's looking at the film as a whole rather than visual, script, acting as separate entities. It's all coming together, which is how it should be, I think. But so often isn't.
Well, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I think that's something I noticed on watching a couple of these films for the second or third time, having watched them once before, years ago.
Right, yeah.
That I enjoyed them more because because of that, Alan, because of that structure and just seeing things being gently set up. I could see the craft. I could see what was happening behind the scenes, so to speak.
I don't want to give anything massively away, but all 3 of these films this week, for the first time when it comes to Christopher Nolan, are films I've not watched since I saw them in the cinema when they came out. So I was rewatching all of them as well. I had the opposite experience to you, whereby I think I came away liking each one of them a little bit less. But we'll get into what that means exactly in more detail. Gareth, just to explain something to you, because these episodes aren't out yet, so of course you won't have heard. One of my famous lists has been getting a bit of attention the last couple of weeks. I have a list where...
Has it been getting a bit of attention from anybody except you, Sol?
Hey, Alan was very interested in hearing Sidney Lumet.
It was a new
was
concept, though. It was a new thing.
Go on.
I have a list that I keep of my favourite directors, but I essentially put all of their films on there and then put an average rating out of 10 based on the ratings I've given out of 10, rank them that way. Minimum of 3 films that I've seen to qualify. And Christopher Nolan, with all of this rewatching and reevaluating, has climbed his way to number 3 on the list so far.
The drama. Oh, I was on the edge of my seat there, Sol.
He wasn't even in the top 10 when we started. I mean, it's pretty big.
He wasn't. But now he is number 3, just behind Charlie Chaplin and Sidney Lumet.
Well, look, before we get into the detail of these films one by one, I think it's a really interesting question about the whole work of Nolan. And these 3 films sum it up, because Dunkirk and Interstellar, I love both of those films. And The Dark Knight Rises, in contrast, is so much worse. Like the leap, for me, in my enjoyment of the films, it's almost like they weren't made by someone of the same species, never mind the same director.
Well, we mentioned last week that Nolan does have this one for them, one for me approach. He makes this huge blockbuster film that makes loads of money, and then they go, "You're our boy. What? Here's 200 million. Make whatever you want." Yeah. And he goes away and makes something. And so that's how you get in films like Inception that we talked about last week, and then Interstellar this week. That just there's no obvious way how to pitch that film to sell it.
Yeah.
Without being able to go, look, I'm Christopher Nolan. You're going to give us the money.
I understand that.
But that's great. I love that him as an artistic entity is going, fair enough. Look, I've earned you some money. Now do one for me. And he's producing these very interesting, original sci-fi concepts that, just probably wouldn't get past the drawing board otherwise.
Oh, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth. I would, if I had to watch these 3 films again, and you told me you can watch all of them or none of them, I would sit through The Dark Knight Rises again to watch the other 2. It's worth it.
I think to move into The Dark Knight Rises, we're seeing that one for you, one for me thing, as blatantly as we ever have done. This was the time where he had to, he sold his soul to the devil by agreeing to make this 3rd film he didn't want to do. And it was time to pay up. And, it's this film that just, I guess he made as good on it as he could, blatantly not being remotely interested in what he was doing. And, we've covered the film before on this podcast in the very early days. I'll make no bones about it. I hate The Dark Knight Rises. I often say... Wow.
Pleased.
In fact, when I was convincing my girlfriend to, rewatch a lot of these with me, I often say, Christopher Nolan's never made a bad film. And then I always remember and have to qualify, except The Dark Knight Rises. I think it is the one blemish on his otherwise stellar career. And I don't really know what happened other than he had deadlines and a lack of interest and didn't have a passion to make it. Like I say, I watched it once in a cinema back in 2012 with Alan, in fact. And I kind of was quite excited to revisit it. I thought maybe with no hype, lower expectations, maybe I'll go in and come away thinking, no, you know what, that was all right. No, I came away thinking less of it because I was ready to hate it this time. The first time I was convinced it was going to be great because, it's Christopher Nolan. He's never made a foot wrong. He knows what he's doing. They've blown up a real aeroplane for real. Oh my God, can you believe it? The Dark Knight Rises is a piece of shit. And if I'm upsetting anyone by being too negative, because we get a lot of flack on this show for being too negative, Gareth, I don't know if you know that. It's largely, it is, to be fair, largely people who listen to all the James Bond episodes and then feel like they are in a fair position to have a comment about the show as a whole, which obviously
they won't be listening to this. They'll be on Calvin's YouTube page.
But, I feel like a lot of the James Bond people might listen to the Christopher Nolan episodes. So if you are one of those people, go and listen to the last 2 weeks. I've been incredibly positive about Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, Gareth, and you should know. Sol's been throwing 10 out of 10s around all over the place.
Wow. Okay.
I bumped the Prestige up to a 10.
We'll see about that. I'm really relieved because I watched this film. I went to see this at the cinema with my wife, and I giggled all the way through it. I found it laughable. And I thought, I've got to watch this again, but it's a Christopher Nolan film, Gareth. Come on, pull yourself together. And so I've got to give it a chance. Don't laugh at the silly voices. Don't laugh at the ridiculous punching someone's spine back in. And I gave it a chance, and it was rubbish.
It is. And I think it's really upsetting because the fact that this is number 70 on IMDb's top 250 of all time, the fact that the Batman fanboys love it and lap it up, completely invalidates the credibility that The Dark Knight received. It's such a shame because that was a legitimately fantastic piece of work, and even if you don't like the genre and think it's too silly, I'm sure you can appreciate that for what it is. It was, remarkably well made and everything. But the fact that this film gets a similar degree of acclaim is just upsetting because it's terrible. On every level. And I mean, let's address the voice now.
Let's do it.
Because there's bigger problems with this film, and that's something worth getting into. Do you guys know, I as a master of impressions, I actually do a phenomenal Bane impression.
Is it going to be very painful?
It is unfortunately visual, much like my Robert De Niro, so it can't be done on this podcast. I will send you a photograph of me doing the impression now on the little chat we had going before we start recording.
Okay, we'll judge accordingly.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's perfect. You know, that's actually just as good.
I suppose we'll post this on our social media, but there you go. Instant Bane. It's great.
Yeah, I like it.
I used to think, like, Bane's voice, what were they thinking? But then I watched Inception again and actually paid attention to Tom Hardy, and I realised, like, oh, that's just how he talks. He's actually just got quite a well-spoken British way of being. And then when he's sort of chewing the scenery a bit, darling, and does all this, it just sort of becomes Bane when you add a little like over.
What a lovely, lovely voice. I have a theory on this. My theory is that Tom Hardy is undirectable. I think his performance in this film is okay. Here's the line when they're at the football match and he says, "Let the games begin." Now, nobody says that. Everybody puts the emphasis on games, not on begin. And he's read that on the script, "Let the games begin," and he thought, "I'm going to do something a bit different with this." And that is everything that's wrong with Tom Hardy.
Let the games begin.
Can I elaborate on that? I spoke about this last week, really, when we were drilling into Heath Ledger's performance. I think Heath Ledger did, as the Joker, some remarkable stuff. Just with his choices. His choices of delivery were so out of left field, but in a way that you don't really register it. I bet you Tom Hardy was sat watching Heath Ledger's Joker every night.
I'm going to bring my own
like,
thing to
keeping
this.
himself, not unable to sleep, thinking, how am I going to do it? Analysing the performance, going, oh, he's done some really weird delivery. I'm going to do some weird delivery that doesn't make any sense. And the result
I don't think he's done anything
get
decent
Bane
for years. If you I don't know if you watch Peaky Blinders. Every single scene he's in that, I piss myself laughing. Taboo, his TV show Taboo, was hilarious. Do you remember Legend? So Legend's a really good example. He plays Reggie Cray really well. It's a really well acted role, which is even more infuriating because it shows he can do it. He's just being difficult, and he's portraying Ronnie Cray like a cartoon. He's basically been playing Charles Bronson for 20 years, and it's time someone called him on it.
Well, I mean, I must say, I watched Bronson and I thought his performance was incredible in it, but...
I see, that's funny, because when I watched Bronson, I'd heard all the hype, I finally watched Bronson, and I just thought, that's incredibly easy to play. It's extremely one note. But the thing with, I've got a bit of a dislike for Tom Hardy, and I actually, when it comes down to it, I don't think he's a bad actor or anything. It's just because he seems to get a lot of praise, and people talk about him like he's the fucking greatest thing since Marlon Brando. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, he's trying to be Marlon Brando. I was just fucking mumbling all the time. Actually, say your words.
He brings his dog on set. Fuck off with your dog, dickhead. This is a professional environment.
I think he's just overrated, but I do like Tom Hardy, I must say, and I do actually think he's a very good actor.
Well, just over and above that, I find Bane to be a shit character, but a specific problem with it is Tom Hardy. If you're going to have a guy with a mask on, find someone who can do stuff with their eyes. Tom Hardy's eyes never move during this film. To the point where it could be deliberate. Like, it's deliberately like,
Kate Blanchett.
I want it to be like a mannequin face. He gives nothing away. The voice is obviously dubbed in afterwards, so there's no sense of kind of reality or spontaneity there. And it just feels like, why not just hire a stuntman to do that? Do a Darth Vader on it, right? Why not just get someone to do the voice and then get someone who can do a decent voice instead of
Let's talk about the voice, because we haven't really touched on the voice. The voice, it genuinely, I almost had to leave the cinema because I was laughing into my t-shirt. It just makes every single word he said made me laugh. I don't get it. I don't get what they're trying to go with there. Like, a muffled voice because he's got a mask on would have been okay, but this kind of disembodied, as if he's got speakers all around us type. I don't know what they were going for, but it was absurd.
I am the League of Shadows. I'm here to fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny.
A big part of the voice and why it's so funny is the absolute, Frankenstein assembly that's gone on in the sound editing. I mean, fuck knows what they've done to it, but, they've made a conscious decision to make it sound fucking weird beyond his own
That's
delivery.
The point. It's too stylized and it takes you out of it. You know, my reaction is to laugh, but whatever your reaction is, it's not realistic. It's not. It takes you out of the action.
I'm going to have similar things to say, honestly, about the sound mix in the next two films as well. I think Christopher Nolan's got a weird concept of sound, audio, and how to use it in his films. And this is kind of the start of it. He obviously sees something in that voice that we don't. And I mean, I don't know. I know people, you know, my girlfriend thinks Bane is really scary and the voice is part of it. I think he's fucking ludicrous, but I think he's funny beyond the voice. I think it's funny that Tom Hardy is blatantly not a very tall man. He's blatantly shorter than most of the people in most scenes, and then I've
written a note here. How tall is Bane? Because it doesn't seem to be conclusive. From the
Well, I'll tell you, as you know, as a Batman fan, as someone who's read comics, I'm not a full-on comic nerd, but I can tell you right now, this is not Bane as the character is supposed to be. Is sadly now, you know, this is kind of the definitive Bane and will affect all future portrayals of him to some extent. But Bane, you know, if the Joker is this kind of Machiavellian, I mean, not so much brain over brawn, but he's definitely not a beefcake, you know, he has to use his smarts to fuck with Batman, even if that's just by creating chaos. Bane is the opposite. Bane is meant to be a big, imposing brute. He's meant to be fucking huge, both in terms of height and just muscles, and he's scary because he can beat you to a pummel you to just nothing. He famously broke Batman's back in the comics. And what they've done here is they've cast Tom Hardy in that role and then bent over backwards to sort it out, instead of just casting someone right for the part. And the other thing is, you know, Bane is not an idiot, he's a smart guy, but he's usually in the henchman role, you know? You'd normally have Joker or someone get Bane to help him with a plan. You would not have Bane being this criminal mastermind, doing all this kind of big Machiavellian stuff to make a point, and, you know...
Can I ask you, Sol, in the comics... Yeah. When Bane breaks Batman's back, is Tom Conti around to thump it back into place?
I mean, look, I haven't actually read the issues in question, but I'm pretty sure, you know, I'm pretty sure it's an actual arc that involves his back being broken, and he can't just fix it himself in a hole in the ground by trying really hard. This film, oh my god! So, like, right. That's Bane for now. We can come back to it if necessary. But this film starts with Batman being Howard Hughes. I think it's fairly common knowledge Christopher Nolan was developing a Howard Hughes biopic for a while. It seems like he got that out of his system with this film. It's this absolutely pointless, unnecessary tangent for like half an hour at the start that Batman's become or Bruce Wayne rather has become a hermit, won't come out of his room. His legs
in the narrative,
are all, like,
we immediately
mangled.
jump forward 8 years from the previous film, and he's been basically a recluse since then. Which I think is, I like that, the idea of just jumping forward 8 years, because it really gives you a chance to play with new ideas, like things have moved on, things have changed.
Although,
I do like that.
Would 4 years have not had the same effect? You know, the actual real time... I get that they're trying to say more time has passed, but 4 years is enough for everything justified by the 8-year time gap to have happened, surely.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we obviously spent a lot of time talking about Tom Hardy being overrated and overacting. Thank God Christian Bale's here to rescue the film. Because we talked about Christian Bale a little bit when I was with you to do the Terminator films. Yeah. And honestly, it feels like the Emperor's New Clothes to me. I do not get Christian Bale. I think he's a ridiculous actor.
I mean, last time you were on, I like him. That's what I said, essentially.
Yeah, we had this
and I think last
time.
week I've kind of covered, you know, I don't think Bruce Wayne is a very good or interesting character at the best of times.
No, but when you give him some eyeshadow and a silly voice, he becomes Batman.
I think Christian Bale and Christopher Nolan do an admirable job of trying to make something with him. So, you know, I think Christian Bale, he's fine here. I don't have a problem with him personally. I think he's doing as good a job as anyone could have with that role.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think he's a bit overrated, but that's not to say he's bad. It's sort of like Tom Hardy, really. Perfectly good.
But I do think that, I've made it pretty clear I'm not a massive fan of Tom Hardy or Christian Bale. But if you look at the supporting cast here, there are some really good actors in supporting roles. And I think they're all really underserved as well. They're not doing great performances either. And that tells me something about the film and maybe the direction rather than, just the actors themselves.
The entire cast here is just, hey, we all had such a great time on Inception, and that worked really well. Everyone come and make Batman with me.
Yeah, I certainly get the impression that people enjoy working with Christopher Nolan. I mean, you can't deny that.
The impression I get, Alan, is that people do 2 films with Christopher Nolan, and then that's usually enough.
One on the way up. One on the way down.
But it's a curious thing that a lot of people will do 2 films, often back to back with Christopher Nolan, and that's it. Maybe more will come back, and that's not to say everyone. Michael Caine's been in everything since Batman. Was that the first one? Batman Begins?
Must be.
Yeah, he's a big fan of Michael Caine, isn't he, Christopher Nolan?
Christian Bale's obviously done multiple because of playing Batman.
Do you know what though? I also thought, because I just rewatched Inception as well, thinking Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Yeah, I really like Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and then I was like, do I though? Because he doesn't do anything in these 2 films that is very interesting. Yeah. And it does seem to have disappeared in the last 5 years. I haven't seen anything.
I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt, but I agree. Like, there's nothing about his two characters here and Inception. Here. Yeah, they could be played by anyone.
Who else is in it? Yeah, Gary Oldman returns.
I think he's great. I think he's arguably the best performance in the whole film, actually. But
I don't think I would argue with that. I've kind of shit on everyone else. Gary Oldman's all right.
Yeah. Michael Caine is the other guy giving a bit of a fight for that title. He's
I can't really make up my mind on Michael Caine in the later Michael Caine years, because he's so Michael Caine, and I like him. I like the character he plays, albeit it seems to be pretty much the same character in every film.
Yeah,
I like him. I can't help but like him.
I'm the same. I always want to dislike him, because I certainly, take issue with some of his personal politics and what have you. But everything I watch him in, I kind of come away thinking like, yeah, he's pretty undeniably great.
You know what? I did get in this film. He does a lot of the heavy lifting and the emotional story, because he's the one
in very little moments.
Yeah, but the whole thing. This comes to the film as a whole. It feels rushed. And those bits feel rushed. Those bits where Michael Caine suddenly has to give a bit of emotional thing. It's like, boom, 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 cut. Right, yeah, we've done the conversation, now get on. It's like, look, I've made a 2-hour, 45-minute film. I need to cut out as much as possible as it is, But then because I want this 45-minute section of him dragging himself up.
Well, let's address this, because you can apply this to all of these films. They are too long.
Yeah.
Well, this is the worst one, because it takes like an hour and a half to get to the plot, which is the kind of no man's land.
It feels like 2 separate
Bane
films,
takes over Gotham.
Yeah, exactly. That feels like a start of a new film.
That is a good idea for a film. Gotham it becomes a no man's land, and the villains take over. Wonderful idea for a film. We don't need an hour of Bruce Wayne being a recluse. This is what I was leading to before. Bruce Wayne is a recluse at the start of the film. It adds nothing beyond a nice bit of character, and it is then immediately dealt with the second he decides that he wants to be Batman again, because they create a robot leg for him to wear. And it's just, the whole thing is completely pointless. It just wastes time in a film that should have been looking to not waste a second. And I just...
What about
get rid of it.
The character of Catwoman. Again,
get rid of her.
We could have got rid of her.
Cut her out of the film.
Again, I like Anne Hathaway, but the film does not need that character.
That's it. I say that's the first film, and then the second film is the Bane story. That's it. Yeah, and then she can pop up in that for a little cameo from the previous film.
I think I used to think that I didn't like Anne Hathaway, and that was pretty much based on this film. And then Les Miserables came out, and a few months later, and I was sort of like, okay, fair enough. She's pretty good, actually. But I mean, again, she's doing nothing worthwhile here, and the character is terrible. I don't like Catwoman at the best of times, but usually people try and make her interesting as much as they can.
At least have her get bitten by a radioactive cat or whatever happens to Michelle Pfeiffer. Like that's how you want your Catwoman to come along.
Yeah, not just good at gymnastics.
But that's it. To get onto a bike, she just lifts her leg up to about 6 foot, and it's like, oh, don't be ridiculous. Just get on the bike. And she's wearing heels the whole time, which I guess that's the character, but it just feels ridiculous.
I know, yeah. It's ridiculous to the point of impractical, and I know that Batman's suit isn't exactly practical, to the point that I don't know if Bruce Wayne can pee in it and he can't turn his neck.
They even acknowledge
it
a few times in these films, don't they? They kind of say, "Oh, you want to be able to move your neck."
But it's it serves a purpose beyond just like looking cool. I don't know. The whole film, it just to say we've spoken about Christopher Nolan being meticulous and things having to make sense and have some real world value and all this sort of thing. Nothing about this film works on any level. It's badly made.
You guys are being very negative. I must admit, I didn't care for the film.
Hey, listen, I am going to be really positive about the next 2 films. I love the next 2 films. So shut your face. I'm going to shit on this one.
Okay.
I think that's it. This is the one film out of a filmography of 10 that I am really going to go and I'm going to take a shit on it, because it's there's no excuse for it. That's what it is. This film is like, what, $250 million budget, something in that ballpark. Years of prep and anticipation. It's unforgivable. But maybe he just knew it was a lost cause, but then it's not. Even if it's not going to be a satisfying conclusion to the previous film reaching such heights, you can still make a good Batman movie. But it's just the League of Shadows. No one likes the League of Shadows. No one likes Ra's al Ghul. The whole thing being this League of Shadows thing. Okay, nice idea to kind of bookend a trilogy. I can go with it if I have to, but they make too much of it, and it's completely nonsensical. Where the fuck is that Lazarus pit? Is it in America?
Well, while we're on the subject of that hole, it didn't seem that difficult to escape from, did it? Not easy, but
you just have to jump really hard. That's
and
the story
really low
there.
stakes. Like if you don't do it, you're going to fall, and it might hurt a bit, but you have another go.
But that's it. And they're trying to make some philosophical point of you have to jump, knowing that like if you don't make it this time, you'll die, rather than you've got a rope. Even though falling that height with a piece of rope tied round your waist would
cut you in half,
dislodge
snap you in half.
Yeah. Especially if you'd just broken your back and then magically fixed it with a bit of rope down there over the course of a month or so anyway. What is that pit? Who's running it? Who's running that pit? They've got TV down there. They're obviously getting a reception. Not a good one, but they get a reception. They're getting electricity. There's obviously a supply of food and water because, people are being born down there.
Oh, man, you can get CNN everywhere. I've been to Bulgaria. You get CNN there.
But that means there must be people manning that site and running it. So perhaps it's a League of Shadows joint. But why?
They established that it's Bane's prison by that point. Because he comes down, drops someone off, and goes back off again. Like, he's obviously choosing to keep those people in there.
But then why hasn't he got someone at the top with a gun?
Because, you think someone's going to just jump that huge gap that an 8-year-old child could jump?
So it's someone that we were implicitly led to believe Bane himself has done, but does this film even ever get into what the mask on Bane's face is?
It's a painkiller.
Yeah, what they said was that the other people in the prison attacked him, tore his face off or something, and the mask controls the pain. That's not how masks work.
It's annoying, that, isn't it? Because in the comics, it's a pretty nice idea. He's got this, crazy. It's similar, but in the comics, he basically gets pumped full of this mad steroid-laden toxin that makes him go mad and muscly, and he can go all berserker when he kind of has a hit off it. And it's tied into painkillers and so on from something that happened to him. But it's a nice idea. It's this duality of, his power and his weakness. I feel like the film never really gets into it, or at least it doesn't get into it in a way. It's like the film is embarrassed that it has this comic book element to deal with.
Yeah.
So instead it just tries to fob it off. But in doing so, it makes less sense than if they just embraced it and dealt with it for what it is. I could honestly pick apart the problems in logic with this film for hours. You know, the fact that a nuclear bomb would have, you know, probably killed them all with cancer within a few years.
Well, you know, Saul, how you know as a writer that a great dramatic device is to put a ticking clock on your plot. Not usually a 5-month ticking clock though, because usually it's like there's a bomb, we have to defuse it. How long have we got? Okay, 5 months. Right, let's not worry about it then.
But it's the bomb's driving around in a van with guns, and this film is so fucking diffused. It doesn't know what it's trying to do. It's all over the place. The fact that when Batman walks his way across the desert that's inexplicably next to Gotham, and, you know, somehow manages to get all his bat shit together, despite that not making any sense, because he's got no one to help him. He's still like a cripple. He still finds the time to climb up a skyscraper and paint it with fucking petrol so he can make a big bat symbol appear. You know, crack a big bat in the ice or something, you know?
You know what else annoys me as well? And this is something that's in all the films, I guess, but particularly obvious here. Don't you just love it when there's a group of about 6 men, all with guns, and they wait and take it in turns for Batman to beat them up without a gun?
Stand off. Wait.
Because he doesn't use guns, you see. So the fact that they would just shoot him from 30 yards away before he had a chance to smack him in the face, it has to be just brushed over.
Now, in an effort to be positive, cinematography is the usual level of Wally Pfister stuff, you know, good. The music is... I think we're going to talk about the Hans Zimmer relationship with Christopher Nolan, but...
I was looking out for the music here, because I do like the score from the other films that we'll talk about later. And so I thought, maybe I'll listen in. And, you know, again, even it's almost like they were all friendly. Even Hans Zimmer wasn't right.
This score's got that kind of... that, like, no one for the life of them can figure out what's being said score, but that's something memorable. That is pretty much where it begins and ends, though. You know, it's not as good a score as The Dark Knight, for example, but it's not bad. But I think everything about this film beyond that is absolute dog shit, and they should all be ashamed of themselves.
Yep.
Everyone involved.
See, I mean, honestly, I find you very negative, and I don't care to mount a defence, but for me it was more mediocre than terrible, I guess.
I think that might be it, though. I think mediocre is so offensive coming from these people with this much at their fingertips to work with at this point in their careers. I think that's why it upsets me so much. And to be honest, I think it is worse than mediocre, because the script is so bad. It's so badly thought through. It feels like several drafts away from being what should have been handed in. And I just think that's unforgivable at this point.
Well, just one more thing I want to mention before we do. One more thing.
Okay.
I remember being very annoyed when we watched it in the cinema. The thing that really annoyed me, and frankly, when I watched it this time, it didn't bother me as much. The ending. The fact that they set Batman
doesn't
up
die.
As, the Batman has to give up everything for the city. And ultimately that means his life, and that's what he does. And then, but actually, he's got a happy ending. Bye. That really annoyed me the first time I watched it, and I guess because this time I knew it was coming, it didn't hit me as hard.
Same.
But to not give him the ending that the character deserves, it was a disservice to the character.
I think there's something to be said for the idea of Batman having a happy ending, and the idea that you can, you know, not give up everything and all this sort of stuff. I just think this film does it appallingly badly. It really annoys me, and the fact that they crowbar in this love story with Catwoman,
that comes out of nowhere.
There's no, like, they're vaguely flirty, but again, like, I don't know, Christopher Nolan can't do relationships or female characters or emotion, so it's just a shit. If I'd really felt he'd found love and wanted to put that part of his life be behind him, I'd be all for it. But it's just so insincere. And it's what we spoke about with these films being plot-driven rather than character-driven. It is a plot-driven romance, therefore I hate it. It's just badly done.
I don't think Christopher Nolan knows how to direct a conversation. Like, if it's just two people talking, he doesn't know what to do, because I think it's too. Perhaps it's just too basic. Like, because then he shoots it in this very basic way and cuts it together really quickly, as if it just need to plow through it and get onto the next thing.
It's not good enough, though, is it?
There are fantastic examples of just a conversation in his filmography, though. You know, even in the Batman films, in the previous film, Michael Caine telling the story about a tangerine.
The size of a tangerine.
You know, that's directed really well. From memory, I think it's just a shot of Michael Caine. Maybe it zooms in a tiny bit. I don't know. You can see Christian Bale's back of his head, but you know, that works fantastically, and get none of that.
That's what you're missing here, when Michael Caine is kind of looking in his eyes and says, like, "I'm not burying you. I've buried your parents. I'm not doing it."
Yeah,
it feels too quick. It's just rushed, and it's like you let Michael Caine have this moment because that's what he's going to give you. He's got the power to do it, and you've built up these characters to establish that. I must admit, I hate the whole loyal servant thing, but you know, it's part of the Batman thing. I get it.
Anyway, I mean, like I say, I could sit around picking holes in this film all day because there's lots of problems. If you want to get really picky, there are some fucking problems with this film. But you know, suffice to say, I don't like it. And I think it's actually badly made. I truly don't think Christopher Nolan wanted to make this film. I think Heath Ledger's death probably soured him on thinking about Batman for a while.
What are you going to rate it?
Well, I had this film as a 5 out of 10, which I think is perhaps the fair rating to give it as a standalone piece of work. That's what I gave it when it came out. Because, like I say, I think it's a bad film, badly made. You know, not truly terrible, just not good. But it pisses me off, and I've given it a second viewing now, and I really did want to like it on the second go-round. And so I think, much like you often treat films, Alan, I think coming from the legacy that it has and the pedigree involved and everything involved going into it, I just think this film is unforgivable. So I've bumped my score down to a 4 out of 10, and I think it is offensively bad.
Well, I've gone for a 3, so I'm going even lower. I mean, the only redeeming feature for me is that it gave me a bit of a laugh. Like, every time Bane was on screen... No, not every time he was on screen. Every time he spoke, I just pissed myself laughing. And, you know, that's never a bad thing. But honestly, as an action film, you know, I was bored during the big action scenes. I think it was... Yeah, I just think it was a badly made film.
I think, like you're saying, judging this from where it comes from, yeah, fair enough, I like The Dark Knight. But I think my level for action superhero nonsense is pretty low anyway, because I don't tend to go for them. So I don't think I have particularly high expectations. Maybe that helped. I think I preferred it this time round to the first time I watched it, based on my memory. However, my rating didn't change. I gave it a 6.
Very generous.
Very generous.
Wait until we do the next two films. Okay, so we're moving on to Interstellar, which, similarly to Inception, is a kind of very high sci-fi concept that Christopher Nolan obviously really likes the idea, and someone has decided to give him a huge budget to realise it.
Well, I think at this point, Christopher Nolan truly had come into his own as an auteur, as a household name, as a selling point for these films. I think this is the point now. Well, to be honest, I think about Inception was the point where companies could just start giving him money to make whatever he wanted, and it was a safe investment.
I think he kind of got away with Inception a little bit. I'm not sure how he got that made, but having got it made and it was so successful, they sort of gave him a bit of a pass to make this, didn't they?
Inception was 100%, wow, The Dark Knight came out really well. We'd really, really love you to make the third one of these films. All right, well, if you want me to come back, that's fine, but I get to make whatever I want with a blank check.
Wow.
But, you know, coming off The Dark Knight Rises, he didn't really have that going for him. But Warner Brothers were obviously pretty desperate to keep him, and they've, you know, I think every film he's made since then has still been with Warner Brothers.
Yeah. So anyway, Interstellar, just to give a basic thing, it's a kind of post-apocalyptic world. Something's killing all the food.
It's pre-apocalyptic, I would say.
We're
It's
on
the
the way.
run-up to an inevitable apocalypse.
Well,
Yeah.
we learn that billions of people have died. The population's much smaller than it used to be.
Yeah, and things are only going to get worse. But then, space plan, go up into space, try and find a new planet to colonize. And this particular character that we're following, Matthew McConaughey, he goes up because he's an old NASA pilot. That's the straightforward story, but then it's kind of really wrapped up with his relationship with his daughter. And then, obviously, once they get to where they're going, what happens there. It's even quite difficult to describe in simple terms.
Well, it's not a clear-cut premise. It's quite
it's
messy.
It's about a lot of things. I really like the Earthbound premise. You know, the setup of that world. I love the way it's realised. It's kind of, you know, we're based in the near future, but there's almost this kind of 1930s agricultural agrarian society. It's like a sort of Dust Bowl steampunk type thing, but. You know, and he captures that drone, and so there's kind of these two worlds that you're already seeing collide even before they discover the presence of NASA. But I think the film, you know, to look more broadly about the film, you know, obviously it's a science fiction film and it's about space, but there was a lot here that tugged my parental heartstrings. You know, it's about
that's interesting.
Parenthood.
Can I pick that up right away? Because I think that's one of the big failings for me in this film. I don't think the emotional story touches me at all. And in fact, I think it leans on it so heavily that it's why I don't particularly care for the film. And I'll go the other way. I find it really stupid. The way that they react on an emotional level. I think I'm far too logical for it.
Yeah.
And I don't have kids, so I can't really...
Well, I was wondering how you felt about the fact that he obviously had a favourite child.
Yeah, the boy can fuck off, can't he? What's that? Yeah, idiot farm boy can fuck off, but my smart science girl is perfect.
All I'm saying, bruv, is that might be why you didn't relate to it.
I remember when this film came out, in a weird sort of turn of events, I didn't go and see it for ages. I wasn't even sure if I was going to bother at the cinema, because The Dark Knight Rises really burnt me, and it was enough to put me off Christopher Nolan for a while. And the initial response to this film was pretty negative. You know, I think it got relatively decent reviews, like 72% I think it has on Rotten Tomatoes. But all the film people I know were just slating it, making fun of it, saying it was shit. And it's nearly 3 hours long. I think it is the longest film Christopher Nolan's made. It's 2 hours, 49 minutes. And I just thought, you know what? I don't need that. Nothing about that film appeals to me. But based on, you know, it's Christopher Nolan and whatever, I think I went to see it, like, just as it was about to leave the cinema. And I had very low expectations. And maybe that played into why I loved it so much. Because I didn't know what to expect. But I found this incredibly compelling sci-fi world that just kind of hooked me in. And then, yeah, I was completely on board. I want to see him save the world.
Well, I want to see him get back to his daughter. That was the emotional resonance for me. Like, yeah, I know he's saving the world. I get that, but that wasn't the emotional pull.
I had exactly the opposite. I was like, "Will you stop fucking about with your daughter? Like, that's not important. You're trying to save the world here. Like, that is not." And it was the same with because that is the only emotional beat you get. With the daughter, him and the daughter, then there's a bit with Anne Hathaway and some guy that she's drawn to or whatever. Yeah. And I was just like, do you want to fucking save the earth here? What are you doing? Like, stop pissing about. You can't make the stakes that high and then go, oh, but this is important as well, guys, by the way. And just ultimately, that was it's been this huge block for me, and I just can't enjoy this film because of that.
If I can jump on to that, I think this film is very much a conscious effort from Christopher Nolan to counter his critics that suggest that he is an emotionless robot.
As we have done.
I think this was very much his attempt to make an emotionally driven film, to show that he's got a soppy side and he believes in love. In fact, he believes in love at first sight. Do you know that, Alan?
I know he's been married to the same woman for 25 years or whatever it is, so I guess that's pretty
he claims that he fell in love with his wife at first sight, and to give him credit, the fact that he's been with her ever since, does lend a bit of credibility.
But that's
to
it. That's
statement.
also that I do know that. Not only are they married for 20 odd years, she's the producer of every one of his films. They work together. They must work together every day. And that is insane as far as I'm concerned in a relationship. If you're that invested in someone else,
it would drive me
it's
absolutely mental.
But I appreciate I am an unemotional robot, so that's okay.
Yeah. Well, so maybe you're not the target for this emotional thing.
I think that's basically what I'm dealing with here.
Let me tell you my story. The way I didn't watch this film at the cinema, but I remember when it first came out on the television. We watched it, my wife and I. And then I watched it again the next night on my own because she didn't want to watch it again because that was stupid. I was really hooked on this film. And so I hadn't seen it again since then. I watched it this week. And I kind of thought to myself, oh God, I hope it stands up to my memory. And honestly, it did. I love this film. I think this might be my favourite film of the 21st century. I'm gonna say that. Wow. I love it. I think you've got the emotional pull there. You've got that sort of that circular love story of him getting back to his daughter. But I love the science fiction element of it. I love everything that happens on Man's planet. I think Matt Damon is brilliant. I love the action sequence on the water planet.
You've lost me.
I think it's great. I think every bit of it is. I think this is a wonderful film.
I mean, yeah, personally, I really loved it. I never got bored with the runtime.
No, I mean, I was fine with that. It's structured well. It's watchable. It rolls along. You want to know what's going to happen.
I will say it didn't hold up nearly as well for me on the rewatch, but I don't know how much of that is due to me not giving it 100% of my attention like I do in the cinema. And you don't have that cinematic experience. One thing I will say, actually, I'm so glad I did see this film in the cinema, not just for the obvious visual aspect of it, but the audio aspect. This film was a bit controversial when it came out because a lot of people were unable to hear the dialogue in certain scenes over the overwhelming music score that was blared at a much higher volume than it often would be. And a lot of cinemas started putting up signs saying, please be aware that the sound mix in this film is an artistic decision. It is not us. Please stop telling us to fix it. And, certainly in the cinema, I get it. It's a weird sound mix. It's quite overwhelming. But I like that. I think it adds to this cosmic sense of this film and the theme of love as an entity. For whatever reason, I think it really does a lot to kind of just blow you back in your seat, and even watching it again on TV the other night, it still retains some of that quality in the sound mix, even though it wasn't with whatever incredible cinema quality speakers. And I think that speaks to Christopher Nolan as a really remarkable director, that he's still playing with weird little techniques like that and seeing what they can do for his films.
I mean, I watched this film for the first time less than a year ago. It wasn't in the cinema, and I can't say anything struck me about the sound mix watching it.
But you did watch it on your little laptop.
I think it's something that now I've seen it, I'd like to see in the cinema just for the story. I think I still appreciate the visual. And let's not mess about. When they're doing a bit of the zero gravity stuff, it all works seamlessly. It looks really nice.
I agree with you on the sound. I think the score is incredible. There's several times where you sort of catch yourself. Well, I caught myself, really, really in the moment, and it's the music that's pulling you in. Most definitely.
So the cast here, Matthew McConaughey's a newcomer to Christopher Nolan's.
Well, this was in the middle of The Reconnaissance, wasn't it? He'd just come off
it was,
True Detective,
yeah.
and he was great in that. And this was him revitalizing his career. And I think he's great in this. Even there's that self-indulgent scene where he's watching the videos, and you think, God, this is the Oscar reel, isn't it? But even though you kind of feel it's a bit self-indulgent, he pulls it off. I think it's a great scene.
I don't think it's self-indulgent even. I just think it's a really great scene, well acted, and it could be done very badly, yeah.
But I guess that's what I mean, yes. It could so easily have just been, painful to watch, but he carries it beautifully. But I thought one of the really, I think, probably underrated supporting performance in this is Casey Affleck as the son. as an adult.
Yeah,
I think he's only in it for a handful of scenes, and he's brilliant. Like he's sort of burning frustration and anger. It's fantastic. Honestly, I think the whole cast are great.
I wish I didn't like Casey Affleck as much as I do. I don't want to like him, and he's a bit problematic, but he is a very good actor, it has to be said. And yeah, you do get a lot of that here. He's very good.
This is my problem, I think. Like what this comes down to is like this guy, right? This Matthew McConaughey guy really loves his daughter. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the beginning and end of the film. It's like it's just like there's nothing here. Like yeah, a guy loves his daughter, right? Okay.
Yeah, and that love for his daughter drives him and drives the human race beyond the bounds of our rotting planet to find something more.
Exactly. Is there not something to be said for the love between a parent and child as a concept for a film?
Not for Alan,
There's 1,000 films that are just about a man loves a woman or vice versa, and that's it. Like, I'm fine with that. I don't think films need to be more elaborate than an exploration of love or an exploration of any emotion.
Well, it doesn't explore anything. He loves his daughter. That never stops. It never changes. It never wavers.
Well, it does. He has to weigh up how he wants to serve her as a parent.
But anyone who was going to go, do you know what? I could save the world, but I need to make sure my daughter gets to school every morning. It's insane. It's just the two things are too far apart. It's not like, oh, should I move to Texas and get this new job that would give me a good promotion, or do I want to stay here with my family? It's just, it's completely nonsensical.
Yeah, because that's boring. So they've made it big and exciting.
Alan, that's right. He doesn't. There is no. There's no scene at the beginning where he's weighing up the options. He's got to go. He knows he's got to go. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't make it any less painful.
But I just what I've seen every war film ever made. You know what I mean? I know what it's like. People have to go away.
Yeah, and again, war's boring. This puts it in space. Yeah.
I just couldn't. I can't get past the fact that nothing happens. It's just not that nothing happens, but the end result is nothing. And in the problem with it is it's suggesting something is happening. The whole idea that this 10-year-old girl is going to hold this bitter grudge against her father for 30 years.
Yeah, that is stupid.
I appreciate really when you're 10 years old, you don't necessarily understand these things.
When you're 10, you're a moron.
But by the time she's a bit older, she goes and works in the place that's dealing with it all. She knows exactly what's happening. She has all the context. Yeah. It's just ridiculous that she would then just be bitter about it for 30 years. That annoyed me.
I agree. That is a real failing of the film, that, if you ask me. The other major failing that really leapt out at me on this repeat viewing, we're talking as though people have seen the film. I think most people probably have. If you haven't, what is it? The world's dying and it's running out of food. They can't grow food. They send a guy into space. What is it? A wormhole's opened up, and it offers a doorway to 12 potentially habitable planets. So they're going to see if any of them are, viable to live on. Now, this team of astronauts were sent off ahead, and they failed in their job. Basically, they are getting signals from one planet suggesting that maybe it is a viable place, so they go to visit it. They get there, Matt Damon's there, that's a big surprise. I've spoken to Calvin about his distaste for this film. He does not like Interstellar, and he hated it because Matt Damon really took him out of the movie, which I think is a stupid complaint. Yeah, it takes you out of the film, but his argument was, well, they should have set him up earlier on when you see the photos of the astronauts, and it's like, yeah, but...
Yeah, if they'd showed the astronauts earlier, and you'd seen one of them's Matt Damon, you go, oh, well, he's going to turn up later.
That's what I mean. That would give it away that he's going to appear later.
Yeah. It didn't take me out of it at all, because I understand that actors play characters in films.
Yeah. I mean, look, for me, it took me out of it for 1 second when I went, oh, Matt Damon's in the film.
Matt Damon, yeah.
And then I was straight back into it. But I must say, on the rewatch, I don't know if I like this sequence, and I want you guys to justify it to me, because I'm not saying I dislike it, but what struck me, having rewatched it the other night, and how it's nearly 3 hours long, was, you could just cut Matt Damon's entire sequence from the film and change 2 lines of dialogue, and it would be the same exact film.
Okay, so much. I agree to an extent. I don't say I particularly like this section, but I think what we go through with Matt Damon's character is an interesting exploration of an emotional issue. And I don't think we have that at any other point in the film. Because every other emotional level is just, well, so-and-so loves so-and-so, that's too big. This was a bit of grey area, a bit of like, well, that's a moral quandary. Why would you do that? And I think it's stupid what he does. And I'm not sure
I don't entirely
that his
understand
character
his
would
plan,
do it.
honestly.
But that's it. It's not rational. It's a man who's been lost in space for 2 years.
Yeah,
He's
I
lost
think
his
that's the
mind.
point. I think that 2 years ago, Matt Damon was Matthew McConaughey, and he was the bravest of the brave, and he went out and he sacrificed everything to do it. And then he was human, and he caved in and he put everyone at risk because he was human. And
he knows he's done that as well, and he's trying to deal with that.
At that point, we're seeing a contrast with McConaughey. He calls him a fucking coward. But we see, later on, we see McConaughey when he's in the bloody bookcase trying to talk to his daughter. And he's saying, stay. He doesn't want to go through all of this. So he's...
Well, that
he's
really
human as
pissed me off because he knows those messages don't work because he was there the first time and he heard her say, it says stay. And that really wound me up. It's like, look, that doesn't work. Try a different message. My point is,
McConaughey is, he's our hero, and yet he doesn't want to be the hero. He's human as well. He just wants to be back with his daughter. And Matt Damon's character is almost giving us he's pre-configuring that for us.
Mm.
Matt Damon's character is called Dr. Man.
Yes, he's human. That's a little bit route one, isn't it? Showing his humanity.
In the course of trying to find some film analysis to explain the necessary meaning of his whole sequence after I realised, hang on, I think you could just cut that. I found the Interstellar wiki, which refers to him as Dr. Hugh.
Shut up. Okay, well, I'm glad that's not in the film.
Now, thankfully, I dug a little deeper, and it does just appear to be some online trolls changing his name on all the various sources to be Hugh Man, and pretending that Christopher Nolan said it in some interview, but then if you actually look at the video, he doesn't say it. I don't think there's anything to suggest that is actually his name. But,
I do think if Christopher Nolan sort of wrote that and he was like, I'll do that, but I will definitely never reveal it in the film because it'd be ridiculous. But on a script basis, it's fine.
Anyway, so Matt Damon comes and goes, and I like the scene as a whole. It is a long film. It feels like that could have gone, but I get what you're saying. It is a nice exploration.
I accept that. I think you're right in that could have been cut. If you were making a sensible length film, yes, you could cut that scene. But that doesn't mean I don't like the scene. I love that whole sequence.
Yeah.
Can I point out a couple more? We talked about Matt Damon. Just a couple more of the supporting cast that I really liked. The guy who plays Romilly, what's his name? David Gyasi. I don't know him. I've never heard his name before.
Either, yeah.
But when they come back from the water planet, and because of relativity, he's been on his own for several years. The way he plays that is fantastic. He's kind of withdrawn and not sullen, that's not the right word, but he just really struggles to make eye contact with them. And they've been gone for a couple of hours, but he's been alone for all these years, and he portrays that so well.
Yeah,
it's not just that he's older. Being alone for that long is gonna mess with you.
And in a couple of sentences and a look, he portrays that. I think it's a really amazing performance.
I'd like to talk about the cast here. There is a robot in this film.
Yeah,
there's a couple.
But he is voiced by a man called Bill Irwin.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that seem like a weird choice? Not that anything he does is wrong, but it seems like such a... That's where you get a big name,
Paul Bettany.
Isn't that the opposite of the Matt Damon problem? You're not thinking, oh, that's Paul Bettany.
Yeah, you either get a huge name or you get someone with a really interesting voice. But here we've just got a kind of jobbing actor with a really ordinary voice, and maybe that's the point.
The reason why, Saul, is that he also basically puppeted the thing on set. Like it was mostly on set. So you need someone who's going to commit to that. As well.
Okay,
I don't know the details of that, but that thing was an actual physical thing that he was wearing most of the time, or something.
Oh right, wow, didn't realise that.
I tell you what, those clunking great machines are obviously ridiculous, and they are a little bit laughable. But the voice performance is great. I really like the character.
I think they're really well realised. I think they're very
I agree.
unique. I've not really seen much like them in other sci-fi. And yeah, it is laughable. When the thing has to go quick to pick up Anne Hathaway and it starts rolling along, it's really funny. But it's also like...
It's original, isn't it?
It makes sense. It works. It's not funny in a way... it's funny in a way where Matthew McConaughey probably found it funny the first time he saw one of them do it. And then it's just normal, isn't it? When does Anne Hathaway have her big speech?
The one about love. That's when they're deciding whether to go to Man's Planet or the planet where the bloke she was in love with. So she does this whole speech about how you've got to trust in love and you've got to you've got to look beyond logic. And but Matthew McConaughey just fucks her off and does what he wanted anyway. It's quite funny.
Maybe it means something more, something we can't yet understand. Maybe it's some evidence, some artifact of a higher dimension that we can't consciously perceive. I'm drawn across the universe to someone I haven't seen in a decade, who I know is probably dead. Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space.
No, it isn't. We're no more capable of perceiving love than we are capable of perceiving hunger or lust or annoyance.
This is it, right? This sums up the film for me somewhat, I think. This was the low point. But it was saved by the fact that McConaughey was just basically... So she says, love, we should follow love because maybe that does mean something. And he was like, no. The fact that you've even said that means I don't trust anything you say and you shouldn't have been let on this ship because you're obviously insane. You call yourself a scientist.
Well, I think that... I think Christopher Nolan is basically saying love is this magic force because the only way that's true is if you can perceive someone else's love in a two-way thing. And I don't think you can. I think you perceive love from yourself. Do you know what I mean? And maybe you pick up that someone else loves you back, but in a way that transcends time, that means nothing to you unless you love them in the first place to be a... Do you know what I mean?
I just think I think it's, we get a little bit of black hole woo, don't we, about, multiple dimensions and all that sort of thing. And
I think Christopher Nolan believes this. That's the problem. I think he actually believes this because he says he fell in love at first sight with his wife, and I think he believes that love is magic. Yeah. Literal magic.
Yeah. But obviously that scene is there to set up later when he goes into the fifth dimension or whatever it is. And, he can navigate this 3-dimensional projection of a 5-dimensional world through love because it connects him to moments with his daughter or whatever. I'll just about buy that on a sci-fi.
That's what I mean by the black hole woo. They sort of use love as an analogy for a dimension, don't they?
Exactly. They've spent 2 hours building us up to that. I don't buy it as a cold concept, but it's...
That's the reason the film works for me, is that thematically it does pay off in the third act. And if you buy into it as part of the world of the film, it's relevant to the themes and the structure. So I can make my peace with it, but I'm not a fan of it.
Before we get to the ending, can I just... One more scene which I really loved was the Matt Damon trying to dock with the space station, blowing it. And then Coop goes and flies on and they spin around and they manage to get docked on and he saves the day. That whole sequence, and again, the score is really important in this. That's about a 10-minute sequence from start to finish. And I was on the edge of my seat the whole way through it. Third time watching.
It's very nicely done. And, to say this is a sci-fi film, it's not particularly action-oriented. And that's about as good as it gets if you like action. But even that's quite understated. It's all about, finding the precision moment and all that sort of stuff.
Well, there's a lesson there because that's better than any of the action scenes in Dark Knight Rises.
Well, yeah. So, the ending, when he actually communicates with his daughter, it's all a bit too contrived for me. Like, he can influence gravity, but that somehow translates to the second hand on a watch, which then continues to move in the pattern he's dictated forever, I guess, because she's got to be able to read it over several times, I guess. It just that like if you're going to communicate with gravity, that makes sense with the books and even the dust. I'll give you that. But what? And then the fact that it's all about her, because my problem with it ultimately is that I don't feel like it's supposed to be like, well, she just happened to find the watch, or think of the watch, or they just left the bedroom like that for 40 years. I think it's supposed to be there's some sense of fate. There's something drawing them together. There's something drawing these things there.
Yeah, love.
Yeah, and that just really annoys me. I think because it's total shite.
Let me read you my notes from this scene. Here's what I've written. First thing I've written is this a brilliant visual metaphor or is it bollocks? And then I've written, this is absolutely beautiful. The score is amazing. Wow. So I asked the question and I answered it. It was very close to being bollocks, but I think he pulled it off.
You know that time, that however they visualize the weird time thing that he finds his way into. That's like a practical effect, apparently. They built a set, projected a load of light effects onto it. It's not CGI.
Oh, really? Well, Nolan is very practical when it comes to...
I was going to say, it's quite remarkable, though, isn't it?
And I really like that. I like the way that they achieve things. Even the stunts like that plane in Dark Knight Rises, I like the fact that that's practical stunts. And I think it gives it a different flavour to most of what you see at the moment.
Yeah. Completely. But at the end, when we see Matthew McConaughey setting all these little messages in play that we saw his daughter receiving at the start of the film, we are seeing it intercut with Jessica Chastain playing his daughter as an adult, kind of looking over it again. And she has this realization that it was her dad the whole time. But there's literally nothing to trigger that realization other than she looks at it and it's intercut with footage from another point in time for us, the audience. It's complete bullshit that she just sort of thinks it was Dad all along, out of nowhere. And that annoyed me.
Okay, I have a question for you. After that scene then, there's a coda where we see him arrive back and she's an old lady and they meet again, and that's lovely and emotional. So, but my question is, do we need that coda? I can see why the film needs it, for that closure. But I don't know. At the end of the bookcase scene, I was satisfied. I thought that would have been a great place to end the film. But I'm not sure about this because I the final scene with her in bed. I had another little cry, so it was a great scene. But I don't know that we needed that.
I think it would change the film. I think it would make it quite a tragic film. In that he ultimately, as far as we know, gets lost out.
I think that's where it was heading. I think that's how it should end. I think.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I kind of, part of me definitely agrees, but I think it's such an unashamedly sentimental film that it kind of makes sense that he does make it back to fulfill his
I think it would have made sense for him to sacrifice everything for love. I don't know.
Yeah, because he promises that he'd see her, again, and he manages to see her one more time, and it's also important to note that he sees what she became and that she was successful and that humanity isn't doomed and extinct, because that's another thing, it tells us that humans survive and live on. I think it's quite a different, darker, bleaker film, obviously, if we don't get that.
But I think if it had ended there, then, it would have ended with him, the circle being complete, him finding his way back to his daughter and giving her, saving the world, but ultimately sacrificing himself to do it.
I don't think I would like the film nearly as much if it did end there, because when I was rewatching it, I kind of thought that's a bit unsatisfying there. And then I remembered, oh wait, no, there's a whole another scene after this bit. I was gearing up for it to end there, and then obviously it doesn't. I do really love this film. I think this is a great example of just Christopher Nolan, what he does. He's perhaps reaching a bit beyond his means with this film, which is something that I don't think I've ever had a sense of him not being in complete control of what he's doing before. But he's still this master filmmaker doing very interesting things. So yeah. I really was, very impressed with it when I first watched it, and rewatching it, it didn't quite live up to my memory of it the first time. So I don't know. I'm still not entirely sure if I'm gonna bump my rating down or not. I'm gonna let you guys go first and mull it over.
Well, I don't think I'm gonna be much of a surprise. I'm giving it 10 out of 10. I've got nothing but good things to say about this.
Well, okay, I'll go counter to that then. I mean, It's a technically great film, and there's definitely bits that I like. I found it very watchable, but I just found it ultimately totally vapid, and you know, all it says is like, "Oh, love, it's good, isn't it?" It never gets past that for me, and it feels like it has the potential to be so much more. So, it's frustrating in that sense. I give it a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
I gave this film when I first saw it a 9 out of 10. And I'm mulling over in my head if I should bump it down to an 8. I don't know. I think I've got to give that first viewing some credit. A film only can do that once, the whole mystery box and what's going on aspect of it. And I found that so compelling on my first viewing. Yeah, I'll stick with my 9, but it's a very low 8.5 being rounded up. I think this is perhaps a signifier of Nolan having peaked a few films ago, and he's kind of on a downward path, but I still think a lot of him. I'm giving it 9 out of 10.
Right. So, after that, Christopher Nolan didn't have any more Batman films to make, so he made Dunkirk, which is essentially the story of, the getting the troops off of Dunkirk beach.
Getting the troops off of Dunkirk and that.
Yeah, that's it, innit? That's basically it. And, I'll jump straight in here. My issue with this film is largely similar to Interstellar in that I don't think it has anything to say. It's a sort of a retelling of some events with nothing added.
Yeah,
absolutely nothing to kind of bring
one
to
man's
the table.
quest to have a shit, isn't it?
You and I have covered this film in a previous episode of the podcast. We did it for the 2018 Oscars episode, where this was up for Best Picture.
That was the last time I watched it.
That was the last time I watched it as well. And yeah, I agree with you. I'll just lay my cards out there. I think this is a good film. I think it's, very accomplished, but I don't think it's a good Christopher Nolan film. I expect more from him, to be honest. This just feels like, and I said this at the time, and I think other people have said similar things about 1917. It feels like a video game. It feels like a VR experience. It's not a movie, but much in the same way as Gravity, which came about 4 years beforehand. It's not telling a story so much as it's just putting you in a situation, and you have to live it for 2 hours. And I think there is value to that.
I agree.
But I agree, I don't think there's any depth or character here.
Well, I originally went to see this at the cinema, and I came out of the film quite frustrated. And just things like the fact I couldn't tell the characters apart because they're all young men wearing the same thing.
I did have a bit of that.
That frustrated me. I was also frustrated about the sort of mixed up timelines, and I couldn't quite figure out what was happening until the very end. So for the first hour and 15 minutes of the movie, I was confused as to who was where and what was happening. Now, on the second watch last week, that problem had gone. And because I knew the characters a little better, that problem had gone as well. And I enjoyed it a lot more on the second watch than on the first watch. Now, maybe that's just because I got myself hung up on those things in the first place. But having then got that out the way, and perhaps my expectations of the building of any character had gone, then I could enjoy it for what it was, and I did enjoy it a lot more the second time. I thought it was, as you said a minute ago, it was sort of taking you in and making you feel part of it, and it succeeded on that level.
For me, it just feels like someone's gone, right, we're making a documentary about Dunkirk. We're going to do some reenactments. And then, their budget's gone out of whack, and they've got out of hand. And they're like, let's just shove all these together and put them in a film. Let's just put them... That's it. Is that enough?
Now, I just want to touch on the issue of... And this has come up in our 2 previous Christopher Nolan episodes to varying extents, but the issue of representation.
Well, obviously, he hates women.
Which I think more than anything, I'm picking up something that was discussed last week. But... this film was criticised upon its release for being so white.
I think we talked a lot last week about representation of women specifically in Christopher Nolan's films. Obviously, Nolan has decided, let's make a film that there's no women in at all, and no have a historically justified reason to do so. So that way, I can just don't have to deal with that problem at all.
There is one woman in it. She's serving the tea.
Yeah.
I think there's two,
Jam sandwich.
but yeah, they're just they're on that woman boat.
But, you know...
They're basically nurses giving out food.
Fair enough. That is at least, historically accurate. And here's the interesting thing, right? You're saying about representation, people of colour and all that sort of thing. I consider myself a pretty well-educated and open-minded person. I have no idea, really, of what kind of proportion of ethnic minorities were of the British troops, I've not. Is it 1%? Is it 6%? I have no idea.
I actually tried. I actually tried to find some hard numbers on this, percentage-wise, and all I could find were articles or forum posts discussing Christopher Nolan's film Dunkirk. The best I could find on the topic was that it is perfectly conceivable that you could go through the events of this film without seeing a person of colour, but at the same time it is perhaps a bit disingenuous to paint that as likely, I think was kind of the vibe I was getting.
Also, it would be interesting, or would you make a point, if you had a load of Indian troops, would they all be in one troop together? They weren't mingling them up, were they? Would they all be stuck at the back of the queue and everyone telling them to piss off?
Yeah, you had Indian army regiments, so it was all Indian soldiers together with British white officers.
Yeah.
That was how it would have worked. I think what tended to happen was that the Indian soldiers got the sort of the crappy jobs, basically. They were labouring and digging trenches. But actually, this part of the war, Dunkirk, it was they were all mushed together on a beach, so they would have just been all in the same place.
Yeah, so I think it must be a creative decision he made. Maybe that's not fair, but I think my guess is, to give him the benefit of the doubt, my guess is that perhaps he just felt it would be a distraction. Because so many people wouldn't be aware of it, it would take them out of the film. And there is perhaps, as I said last week, perhaps a justification that that's not his story to tell. It might feel a bit insincere if he was to kind of wade into that whole thing. Not that I'm saying that's the right attitude to take at all. It's just I'm trying to figure out why.
But I think
he wouldn't.
If you're going to do that, you have from his position, you have to make a conscious effort to go, do you know what? I want to say something about the representation.
Yeah.
Let's just get an Indian troop. We'll put them in the middle of these extras. That's fine. And you don't have to draw attention to or anything. But you know what? Christopher Nolan isn't dealing with extras. You know what I mean? It's like the second AD or whoever has gone, right, what extras do we need? We're making a war film in the 40s, British troops will need young white men. Can you find me as many white men from 18 to 32 as you can find, please? Like that's it. And the person who's making that call has had the same education as me and would think, oh yeah, it's all British white troops. Is there Indian troops? I don't know, whatever, they're probably in India or something. That's it. And so at some point, someone has to make a kind of conscious effort to kind of say something about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to hold it against him for not doing it. I mean, it's just
yeah.
Well, can we talk about the horror of war? I find when I watch war films, and this was no exception, I end up just extremely angry about the waste, about the way we treat people, the way we treat young men.
Yeah.
There's a bit where Mark Rylance on the boat, he's talking about Cillian Murphy, and he says, "Oh, he's shell-shocked, George. He's not himself. He may never be himself again." And I'm the father of a 14-year-old boy, and as I look around the world, one of my biggest fears is that there's a war, and he goes to that war, and even if he comes home, he'll never be the same again. And I just think the way that we treat generations of young men and send them off to war, it makes me furious. Every war film I ever watch, I just get this pent up anger.
Yeah, you were furious about Rambo.
But the kid who dies on the boat, that's a tragedy. That's presented as this tragedy, but it's just one more death in amongst all the others. And you think, oh, it's a shame that kid died. We'd have used him on D-Day in 4 years,
I couldn't quite figure out what they were trying to tell with that story. Was it a sort of like, hey, just regular old people they can make sacrifices to, or was it saying, look, this is just another meaningless death? It was a stupid thing that happened.
Yeah. He was 3 years younger than all those others. He was the same.
I think it's trying to show the impact beyond just the immediate people being sent to die, but I'm not entirely sure myself.
I think he's humanizing the death that we've seen death all around, but it's just another young man in uniform. It's almost like this is someone that we've got to know and we can relate to.
We haven't really got to know them, have we? Perhaps that's the problem.
Yeah, but I think again that's by design. I don't think you're really meant to get into this in any character sense. But that's it. 1917 throws you into the horrors of war head first in much the same way. It's done in a very like playing a video game kind of style.
But it has the narrative thrust to it.
But it draws you in and you feel the tension and you really sit with the horrors of war firsthand at times in that film. And it is harrowing in places in the way that war should be, whereas Dunkirk never does that.
Well, I disagree with you slightly there, Sol. I take your point generally, I agree with you, but I think where it really works is in the scenes when they're on the ships and the ships are sinking and the ships are falling on top of people. I think they're really effective scenes. You feel the claustrophobia of it. I noticed that it was when they'd been on the boat having their tea and jam. And that ship gets torpedoed, and as it's sinking, it's falling on top of them. What I realised was that we were filming. The camera position was at the water's surface, so we weren't looking from above. It was that drowning rat's eye view. I think they've done a really good job of capturing that water level fear that you're about to go under, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I think a point in this film's favour as well on this front is the music, which once again is a real technical exercise from Hans Zimmer and Christopher Nolan. It's not so much about write some great music that we'll want to listen to. It's like, what clever thing can we come up with to play around with this time? Now, I know from talking to both of you in the past that this really fucked you off when you went to see the film for the first time, Gareth. Is that something you warmed up to on your repeat viewing? Or
I really like the well, again, we talked about the sound mix, didn't we? And the fact that the score seems to be a combination of incidental noises, like the sound of the planes coming over, and then it I don't know, it's almost like a hybrid of that sound effect with music. And I think it's very well executed. I think it's very well done.
I guess I like the concept in theory. I found the music very overbearing, generally. It's overscored, I guess.
That's the point. But that is the point. I mean, that what I was saying with the kind of technical thing, I think I might be speaking out of turn here, but it certainly has the hallmarks of it. I think the music is what's called a shepherd tone. Which is essentially an audio illusion. It's the equivalent of an optical illusion, but with sound, which is this, essentially, you can create a noise that sounds like it is rising in pitch or lowering in pitch eternally, because you kind of layer multiple sounds over the top of them. While one is rising, you bring one in a bit lower at the same time, and then fade it down. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but basically it sounds like it's going.
It does make sense, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I remember that. I remember thinking, "God, this has been building to a fever pitch for 25 minutes, and I think I'm going to burst."
Yeah. I don't know if any of this for sure. I'm going purely off of watching the film and what I think they did, but it sounds like Christopher Nolan spoke to Hans Zimmer, said, what can we do that will be unbearably tense for a prolonged period? He went, well, there's this audible illusion that we can create some music with that will just put people on edge and create this kind of overbearing sense of stress. And it really, it takes me out of the film on one level. I'm very aware of the music, and I'm like, oh my god, that's really getting to me. I think it's a really remarkable achievement, to be honest, the music in this film. I think it does wonders for it.
I don't know if I got that sense of tension or anything. It was more just like, I felt like...
It stresses me
out.
I
wish the music would stop telling me how to feel, so I could just appreciate this on a more gritty...
I suppose there is an element of a good score should you not notice a good score? And you certainly notice this.
I don't know. I've heard that being said before, but I don't know where it comes from.
Yeah,
and I completely
I'm not
disagree
convinced
with
about
it.
it either. I think that Hans Zimmer's. I'm not a person who notices scores. You know, it's not really my thing. But certainly with Hans Zimmer and these Nolan films, it jumps out as a character to me, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
I think one of the things I wanted to talk about with this film was this sense of survivor's guilt that we get at the end. I think how we process grief is a very underlooked element in a lot of films. You know, people suffer all this death and suffering and they just move on, you know. I love the scene at the very end when they're in the train and he's just so filled with shame. We've let you all down. All we did was survive. And of course, you know, the whole thing was spun as a great victory, which was propaganda, you know. It was undoubtedly a military success, but it was a military success that came at the end of a huge failure. And he knew that. That soldier knew that. But it was good to see that. I think that is something that could be explored a lot more in war films. You know, obviously.
Well, that is my favourite scene in the film, I think. Yeah, I'll echo your thoughts.
Well, I remember first time I watched that bit jumped out at me. Not necessarily in a kind of like, oh, this is a good exploration of this human emotion or anything. Because obviously we don't look at it in any sense. But it was more, that was the only bit in the entire film that made me go, do you know what? That's making me look at this in a different way. I'd never thought of that in that way. Because again, my education of this period of history is, you know, when you're 14, you do GCSEs or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, something, Dunkirk, D-Day, Yalta conference, I don't know, something like that. So it's like, that's it. And it's...
Steady on.
So to have that kind of secondary element of like, you know, actually, that was a total fuck up and they felt, you know, they'd fucked up and they had to be rescued. You know, if you're being rescued, that's not, you haven't done your job right, have you, I suppose, in that sense.
Correct, yeah.
And that was nice. It was nice to get a different perspective on that I had never thought of myself.
I mean, to be honest, I'll reiterate what I said at the start. I like Dunkirk. I think it's a good film, but I expect so much more from Christopher Nolan. And were it not for The Dark Knight Rises, which is this weird blemish in his career, I would say this is his worst film by a significant margin, to be honest.
Well, I think, as I said at the beginning, I preferred it on the second watch to the first watch. But I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for the film because the reason I enjoyed it more was my expectations were lower because I'd already seen it. So it suffers, like your comparison with 1917 is instructive. It really suffers from not having that real narrative thread, from not really having a story. It's an immersion in the characters and their desperation and their fear, and it works on that level. But I do think it's missing something. It's missing a mission. It's missing those two lads trying to get that bit of paper to the front line, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's obviously by design, but I just think it's perhaps a failed experiment. Yeah,
I think that's fair. It sets out, it does what it sets out to do.
Yeah.
But that isn't necessarily justification enough.
But I mean, I give it a 7 out of 10, solid.
Well, I give it an 8 out of 10. I do enjoy the film on its own terms, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it a 6 for the reasons we've spoken of.
So, are you ready for the results, Alan?
What? Have we had tests?
Christopher Nolan list.
Oh, right, okay, go on.
Oh, my God.
Because he was, of course, at number 3. But unfortunately, bumping The Dark Knight Rises down, that's bumped him down from an 8.1 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10. So he's now joint 4th place with James Cameron and Quentin Tarantino. They are all sharing 4th place with an average rating of 8 out of 10. Of course, when I finally get round to watching Piranha Part 2, The Spawning, that may change.
So why don't you two sum up the overall Christopher Nolan experience then, having watched the whole thing over the last few weeks?
Cold, emotionless.
Mm-hmm. Technically spectacular.
Yeah.
Actually, spectacular isn't the right word. Because
technically, like, I want to... Well, awesome in the truest sense of the word. You know, it is humbling to take in what some of these films manage to achieve on a technical level and a writing level.
And do you think that, because often when people, I suppose James Cameron's another good example, they advance the craft of filmmaking, and sometimes the films they make might not be wonderful, but they change the environment and other people can do things as a result. Do you think he's had that sort of impact?
Very much so, very much so. Although I think he's put more of an effort into perhaps keeping things as they are. I think Christopher Nolan is perhaps the biggest, most outspoken advocate for filming on film stock. He's done a hell of a lot to save, I think, Kodak and keep them in business so they can keep producing film stock, so he and Quentin Tarantino can keep filming stuff on film.
But Sol, innovation doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about technical innovation necessarily. I'm talking about innovation in the storytelling, in the language of film, if that's not too pretentious.
Like I sort of said last week, this holistic approach to filmmaking where everything matters, everything is part of the same thing. I really like that because I think it's something that gets missed very often, particularly in bigger studio releases. You get a little indie film, a little auteur making something that's going to be more likely. To do it on this scale is something you just don't see that often. So even if I find his stories unemotional and kind of simple on that level, the way they're formed is impeccable most of the time.
Well, absolutely. That's something that people say glowingly when talking about David Fincher, who is one of the few people that we perhaps could still get a director season out of on this podcast, thinking about it. But that one of the things people say about him is that he is a director who knows every aspect of the craft to the point that he could do it himself. And that's very rare that, you have a director who understands the craft of costume design, lighting or whatever to such a degree that, and I think it makes a world of difference. And, I would say Christopher Nolan is most likely that same kind of director. I would argue, in fact, that he and Fincher have quite a similar vibe about what they're doing in a lot of ways.
But I think for me, the one main ingredient that is missing from his work is emotional value. And, if you find that in Interstellar, then that's why you love it. I didn't, because whatever it was that he's putting in there didn't touch me. I think he would benefit from teaming up with a writer who can put that into his work for him, because he can't do it. He's demonstrated quite clearly that he can't do it. So, Nolan, done. If and when Tenet ever comes out, we shall do a Diminisode about it.
Yeah, head over to patreon.com/dimreturns for all our Diminisodes covering random bits and pieces and new releases. There haven't been any of those in a while, so we've been doing other stuff. But, there's a lot of interesting stuff on there. I'm working on something now that's quite interesting that'll be out soon, hopefully. And tell us what director you want us to cover on patreon.com/dimreturns. $1. $1.